Lately there has been a lot of salt revolving around PvP balance and the lack of balance updates, but we know that elite specializations are being developed for the End of Dragons expansion, and they will want to balance all the other classes around those elite specializations. So while those elite specs are still being tuned, there isn't much point to spending much time testing the current balance since it's going to change anyway. Of course, there should be a couple changes here and there, but really there isn't much you can do about it. So instead of fearing these overpowered builds that we're seeing in the meta right now, like the Renegade or the Burn Dragon Hunter or the Minion Master, because we know that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Try to focus on what you can control. Since you can't control the balance of the game, but you can control your gameplay and what class you play, maybe consider countering these overpowered builds. Before I go over these counters, keep in mind that not every one of these counters is the same role. So if I take a DPS and I counter another DPS, then you're usually going to be in a lot of those situations with them and you're going to counter them harder. But if you're a duelist and they're a DPS, you're not really countering them all the time because they're not always in the same place as them. So keep that in mind. So let's check out the Renegade build first. The idea of the whole Renegade build is you just have like this short bow, which is constantly doing damage from range, so it's really safe, and then you're really tanky as well. So the one thing that does counter this is pretty much projectile reflect, because all of your damage is mostly, I mean obviously they have Spirit Crush, they have their staff auto attack, but mostly their damage comes from their short bow. So the hardest counter to Renegade is either reflect or conditions, because they don't really have a lot of condition cleanse. So what are some of the best builds for countering a projectile based class that is also weak to conditions? Well, the core condi Necro build is pretty good with the Poison Cloud, and you have the Boon Corrupt as well with Scepter and the Dark Path if you're taking the Path of Corruption trait. There's also the Lightning Rod Weaver build. So the Lightning Rod Weaver build is going to have a lot of projectile reflect on it because it is the focus offhand basically on Elementalist is just really good. In air you have Swirling Winds, and in earth you're going to have the Magnetic Aura, and the Magnetic Aura is also a reflect on yourself. So really strong versus the Renegade, and since you have the speed runes, you're going to be running speed rune, Marauder, yeah, with dagger, absorption, energy, and then these traits. You have pretty much weakness every time you give out a CC, and that's really good versus Renegades because they're a power class. So weakness is, or pretty much in general, this build will counter power builds, but the fact that it also blocked projectiles is really good. So here's like what I've been playing around with Lightning Rod Weaver, and like I've just been destroying Renegades. I'm not really that good at it, but basically what you do is you start out with your double air attune, you use Shocking Aura and then your 2 skill, and then you'll transmute the air after you get a little value of that. And then you'll maybe Gale, and then from there you can Gale into your fire and your fire, air, plasma burst, which does a lot of damage. Or what you can do is instead of using your Gale immediately, you can go from air to water, and then air water gives you Katabatic Wind, and then you can do, that's another really close range CC. And then from there you can go water earth, which is a mudslide, and then since you swapped out of water you have Comet, and then from there you can go into air earth with grinding stones, and then use your air again, and then you kind of just reset your combo there, going into either fire or air, or you can just, you know, try to kite. So that's pretty much like the basic combo is air, water, earth, air, and then yeah, you can go from there. I'm not really amazing at this build, but yeah, that's pretty much it. There's also If you want, you can play a support build, so you can actually play support Tempest, and that has a lot of reflect as well because that's using offhand focus. So Ellie's pretty good at countering the Renegade build because of the projectile reflect. What also is good is the Scrapper. So Scrapper has a lot of projectile block as well with the defense field and the hammer too. So yeah, Scrapper, Weaver, Tempest, all very good versus Renegade. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Then the next build that a lot of people are using is the Burn Dragon Hunter. And the reason why this build is so strong is because when people stand in its damage, it gets the kills pretty much faster than any other kill. So how does this build get its damage? It gets its damage from Symbolic Power, which makes their Virtue passive proc faster whenever they hit with a symbol. And if they're hitting multiple times with a symbol, it's multiplicatively. And then they have Permeating Wrath. So basically whenever they use a symbol on a target like this, it's just giving out tons of burns like that. And I'm only hitting one target and it's giving burn like every second tick. So if I'm in a team fight, my symbols are doing a lot of damage. So you don't want to stand in their symbols against a Zeal Dragon Hunter. As you can see, that's like a ton of burning. And then you don't want to stand in the Sword of Justice, which looks like this. So whenever you see Sword of Justice or you see a symbol, don't stand in that because that's where their damage is. One thing that players are getting confused with is that they have a lot of traps and they have like stealth from the traps, but the traps don't actually do that much because they're usually running Carrion Amulet. Like this can give out a ton of burn, but it's really not that much. It's really not anything you need to be watching out for. Test of Faith with Carrion, that doesn't do any damage. So don't worry about these traps for damage. Walk out of them obviously, but don't blow your dodges on them. You want to use your dodges to get out of Sword of Justice or symbols. And then you also want to watch out for Dragon's Maw because that can keep you still in the Sword of Justice. So when you see them place down this, you'll see this animation. If they place down the Dragon's Maw and you get stuck in that, this little field around them, yeah, that'll kind of like create a terrain, and you don't want to be like hitting into that wall because it's terrain. So when you do get stuck in the Dragon's Maw, what you want to do is either use ports to get out, use stabilities to get out, or if you have a stun break, what you can do is you can dodge into the edge of the wall and then immediately stun break as soon as you get CC'd, and then that'll get you out of the Dragon's Maw. So what is good against the Dragon Hunter though? I mean, obviously you can play around Dragon Hunter as anything if you know how to not stand in the symbols and the Sword of Justice. But what is a actually good build against it? Well, we're going to go back to Weaver because Fire Weaver is a very good counter to Burn Dragon Hunter because Burn Dragon Hunter really doesn't have that many like covered conditions, so they're mostly going with burns. And Fire Weaver is really good for that because it has the Smothering Auras, which every time they go into fire, they'll get Condi cleanse, and then they can just use the Fire 5, which will cleanse even more conditions. So they just have so much Condi cleanse on this build, and then they have the Earth 4, and if they get stuck in Dragon's Maw, they can also use Obsidian Flesh to just get out. So this is pretty much a hard counter to the Burn Dragon Hunter build. And a Fire Weaver is more like a duelist, and a Burn Dragon Hunter is more like a DPS. So you can't really carry your team as a Fire Weaver if they're dying to a Burn DH. So what you can do in that scenario is you can just go Fire Tempest again, right? So seeing a pattern here, Ellie is pretty strong. So Ellie's pretty good for the Reflect, it's good for the Condi Cleanse, and yeah, it's definitely a very good pick in the current meta because it counters Burn Dragon Hunter and it counters Renegade, which is the two main DPS classes. And I know what you're thinking, right? You're probably thinking, well, Weaver is starting to counter a lot of these meta classes. Isn't Weaver pretty good? Yeah, we'll go over Weaver counters as well. So one thing that's a good counter to Weaver, as well as the Burn Dragon Hunter, is just Necromancers. Necromancers have the core build, they have the Reaper build. So Reaper is pretty much good versus any LE build because of the amount of chill that it gives. You also have the core Condi Necro, which is good versus Burn DH and Weavers because it has chill and it has condition transfer and boon rip, so it's just really good. And then you also have confusion mirage, which is really good against weavers because confusion is another condition just like chill that counters elementalists. So yeah, weavers get countered by basically mesmers and necros. And then finally, we're going to check out the probably one of the more oppressive builds in the meta right now. It's the Minion Master. I wouldn't say that the build is too amazing, but it does have a lot of pressure in small scale situations. So if you're in a 1v1, and you can also play like Scourge or Core to be honest, but I like to play it as Scourge. And pretty much in a 1v1, you have all these minions and the enemy can't really punish you because the minions have more effect the smaller the situation is. But if you're in like a 2v2, then the minions can be avoided a lot more because you don't have to go towards the Necro who has the minion protecting them. You can fight their ally. So creating non-1v1 situations is how you counter a Minion Master pretty much. But obviously there are going to be counters that can 1v1 it as well. So here is a build that I have been trying out a little bit. It is a Condi Chrono, and the reason why it is a counter to the Minion Master build is simply because of Moa. So Moa is really good versus any kind of minion build because when a Necromancer is transformed, which Moa will transform them, it will basically remove all of their minions. So it'll basically like they'll just disappear and they'll go on cooldown. So you want to use the Moa with your Continuum Split, and that'll give you basically every 100 seconds or less because of the alacrity, you can basically Moa a minion Necro. And since they don't have a lot of stun breaks and stuff like that because they're running all minions, you can just stun them with Magic Bullet and then land your Signet of Humility and they can't dodge it. Also, Scrappers are very good versus minion Necros because Scrappers will have extra barrier the more enemies they hit and the more damage they deal. So in situations where they're hitting all these minions, they get a ton of barrier. And Scrappers are survivable enough to basically kill out the minions while they're fighting the Necro, and they can just kind of like cleave out. And another thing that's really good versus Minion Masters, not necessarily in a 1v1, but in like 2v2s or any kind of situation, like a Reaper can basically like ignore the Necro, the Minion Master. So there's two Necros here. There's the Reaper, and that's countering the Minion Master. So the Reaper ignores the Minion Master until their team needs to deal with it. And then when they do, the Reaper has Executioner's Scythe. They don't really have a lot of stun breaks. And the Reaper just gets so much value out of the lifesteal because it does more lifesteal the more things they hit. And yeah, they just have so much damage that it just cuts through all the minions and the Necro's health as fast as possible. And that's fine and all for countering one Minion Master Necro, but what happens when the enemy team is full of Minion Necros? Well,